thank you, Elena, and Books Inc. for asking me on. This is really an honor to be
We're
with
very
you. Thank
excited. So thank you. I'm gonna mute myself now.
And an honor for me as well. I mean, the great thing, especially on a hot day like this, you see really the advantage of Zoom. None of us had to park and schlep through the heat to get to the bookstore. We're all just comfortably there. So welcome to all of you. And it's a pleasure to talk to Dan about this. I don't know how many of you caught what Dan was speaking about a moment ago about how this novel wasn't meant to be a novel at all in the first place. It started out as a script. I wanted to pick up on that and ask you if by virtue of living in Southern California, are you sort of stipulated that everyone must write a screenplay or a treatment at some point while they're there?
Yeah, if you're not a waiter in Los Angeles at some point with a script in your back pocket ready to drop on, oh, you're an agent, oh, you're a producer, you're really not living in LA, you're not from LA, and you have to do it. Actually, no, it's a big city and not that many. In fact, that's one of the things I really like about LA. I should not be saying this perhaps up in San Francisco, but it's a huge city with all sorts of things going on. There is a large portion of that city that's really fascinated by the movie industry, the industry as it's called down there. And, a lot of people writing, but not many people making it. And if you write poetry, you're not going to make it. So you do it because you love it. So I'm never disappointed that I haven't made $1 million from my poetry. To write scripts, you have other expectations.
How much, once you got into the room with the studio folks, how much fatuous flattery did you hear?
How much what?
Fatuous flattery did you hear?
Well, not enough.
Well, the real thing that counts is when they write the check, right?
Exactly. We were waiting for that. That would have been flatulence I would have liked.
Well, how long between the time that this now this was the script or the treatment that became Rancho de Amor?
It was the script was Oranges. This was always just a treatment, and that was written probably 23 years ago.
Just so folks understand, explain exactly what a treatment is as opposed to a full script.
It's a good question. A treatment is about 17 pages of the plot, the characters, the what is this about, and a little bit of the dialogue, so that a studio, the readers can get a sense of whether or not they'll even ask for a spec script or some script from you. And that's what a treatment is. And so it was the entire thing. Now, this is very different. The novel is very different from that treatment. That treatment might have worked well as a film. I think the book would as well, but I didn't want to do it. I just saw a number of things in that treatment that I just didn't like. And, you write, when you're writing, your characters often take over, and they went in a slightly different direction than what would have been or where they would have gone had it been a script.
So 23 years is a long time for something to sit dormant. What do you think sort of caused, as you describe it, the knock at the door or at the drawer rather, that said, let us out, we want to be a novel?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I know that I had been writing some pretty dark pieces. Seeing, I had the Marsh put on a killer story. It wasn't the premiere, but it was essentially an equity production. It was a 6-week run. So I was seeing this dark noir-esque play of mine a lot and dealing with it. And I wanted to write something else. I've written kids' books, and I like writing kids' books because they're not particularly dark. I mean, there's some really wonderful darkish kids' books, but no, mine aren't. So I like to go back and forth. I like romantic comedies. My wife and I watch a good number of them. And so it was just the opportunity to do something very different. I had not written a novel. I'd written some novellas and short stories, but not a full novel. And so I wanted to do that. And these characters because I think about plots from time to time, I remembered for whatever reason at that right time, this plot, more or less, and then those characters. And that's when I guess they were knocking and I didn't hear it until they made me think about them. And then I opened the drawer and saw that it was fun. It would be fun to try, just an experiment.
Before we go a little further with that, I want to just pick up on something. You said that you and your wife watch a lot of rom-coms. Who are some of your touchstones or some works that you especially admire, whether in print or on screen?
Well, pretty classic. Anything with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn, I will watch and watch over and over again. We will. You know, favorite ones, Charade, Discreet, which is with Ingrid Bergman, the Love in the Afternoon, but that's with Cooper. But you know, those are really wonderful. I love Harry Met Sally. I think Nora Ephron is incredibly funny and wise. I saw recently we saw, let me see, oh yeah, Beyond the Lights wasn't exactly a romantic comedy, but it was quite funny and quite intelligent. In terms of other romances, to be honest, I read very few. I don't know that I've read many more than a few all the way through. It's Jane Austen. Jane Austen got me when I was 17 and a punk kid surfing and sailing and getting into trouble. I fell in love with Jane Austen. Her wit, her wisdom, the depth, how philosophical she is. I used to teach philosophy, and she's one of the best epistemologists I know. That, I think it's chapter 17 of Pride and Prejudice, when Jane and Elizabeth are debating what they know and how they know what they know, a true theory of knowledge. And it's a brilliant chapter. How we know what we know. It happens to be a domestic setting, but those are the settings that most of us live most of our lives in anyway. So I really, really love her work, and have read most of her works.
It's funny you would mention that, because I actually thought of Emma with respect to your heroine with Catherine Doyle, both of them being slightly self-deluding heroines who don't really know their minds or their hearts as clearly as they think they do. Emma especially, but it's true of Catherine Doyle also. Yes. Well, let me ask you about, again, a little bit about more of this transformation, that the basic bones of the treatment are those that furnished forth the novel, or were there some, you know, substantial structural and or thematic things that emerged in writing the novel that were not, at least in vestigial form, there in the treatment?
I'd say more thematic issues were not as apparent until my characters started talking about things. Until they started to live and have a vision of things on their own. The plot is pretty much the same. You know, it's the contrast. You know, the sine qua non of theater is conflict, or at least contrast. And there was this immediate contrast, if not conflict, between the rural and the urban, the sophisticatedly educated and very bright woman from New York City, and an educated. He had gone to college until his parents died, and had to taking care of his sister. But he was a cowboy. He loved cowboying, and he loved the quiet. And so you got the noise and the bustle, hustle, bustle, and then you got the silence and the isolation. You got two very different worlds, two different worldviews. And there was an article written by Wesley, New York Times. It was a brilliant article, forget his full name, about the elements of a good romantic comedy. And
Wesley Morris.
Yes, Wesley Morris, exactly. And he rang the bell that was ringing for me. It's how the essence of a romantic comedy seems to me, and to him, to be this coming together of two people who are different. How do we accommodate one another? How can we even love one another and complement one another? How can we learn to be together? What is that chemistry that makes up for more than just being together? That's love and, you know, the sexual tension and all of that, which is also exciting. But also, how can two very different people with very different backgrounds come together and make a go of it, and learn how to like one another, to learn how other people live? And so that was the setup. I had been briefly a cowboy, and not so briefly lived out in the middle of nowhere. So I knew rural life better than most people that grow up in Los Angeles and live in San Francisco and Paris. But so I knew a fair amount about that. And then, of course, I lived the urban life. So I thought, wow, interesting contrast.
Without giving anything away, one of the things that's fun about your book, many things are, but one of them is that inside this romantic comedy, there's a romance novelist lurking inside of it, one Loretta Debonair, or which as readers will see, has a witty turn to the name itself. I couldn't help thinking she's very old, and I couldn't help thinking of Barbara Cartland. Was she in your head at all as a model for Loretta?
Well, after the fact, she was going to be an older woman. And then I believe somebody at my wonderful publisher, West Margin Press, suggested, have you read any Barbara Cartland?
No.
And I said, no, I have not. And my wife said, oh, well, we have a book or two of hers. Take a look at this. And then I realized, oh, yeah, this is perfect. So she became ex post facto an influence, if that works out.
That's the case, in this case, of post-mortem life imitating art or something.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me ask you about, it's the second annual romance day here at Books Inc., which of course after two, it's now a firm tradition, which must be repeated invariably for every year henceforth. But one thinks typically of romance novels being female protagonists and often female writers, but by no means always. I'm not familiar with a lot of the authors who turned up in my little search about male romance novelists, but there certainly are some. What tends to be the case, it seems, is that they tend to take male protagonists. Your real protagonist, the real voice of this book is Catherine Doyle. It's really a woman's book. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about crossing the gender line and trying to inhabit the sensibility of a female character.
It's an interesting question, and it's been something in my life for a long time. As an instance of it in my practical writing life, when in my mid-20s I was not publishing a whole lot of my poetry. And I thought, well, I'm going to try a pseudonym, and then I'm going to try to write like her as well, Christine Dutton. And I didn't have any more luck publishing any of Christine Dutton's work than I was having with my own. But what I did discover was that Christine Dutton is a really good poet. And I, in fact, am somewhat jealous of her. She does have a different sensibility. When I think about what a woman might feel, or just feel what a woman might feel, I don't know that I get it right, but I know that I am somewhat different from the Dan Harder who writes other poetry, and it's exciting. And I think, quite frankly, I know we're all supposed to be writing about ourselves, but I think because we only really know ourselves, but I'm not sure we know ourselves all that well anyway. And I think it is something that all people who write do, whether they feel they should or not. It's to inhabit their characters. They have to care about somebody else. Otherwise, every character is the same character. You're just popping out, well, there I am, Dan, 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 and Dan is talking to Dan. Dan gets bored with Dan, but Catherine didn't bore Dan. And who is this other person? How do we reach across gender lines, all sorts of lines, to write about the other. Who is that other in relationship to ourselves? Who is that other in relationship to his or her own life and context? And it is, I think, an extremely exciting aspect of writing.